Hi, good morning. My name is Dana. I'm a freshman. I'd like to tell you about a special program happening here at Harvard next week. My grandfather, who's a Holocaust survivor, is coming to give an account of his experiences. I think it'll be a really special opportunity to hear a moving account, a personal account of history. He has spoken at other illustrious universities, at the UN. His story is quite incredible. The event will take place at 7:30 in Memorial Church a week from today, Tuesday, March 18th. For more information, you can find the Facebook event. It's called Surviving Auschwitz, a Holocaust survivor's story. You could just check Holocaust under the Harvard network. And it would be great if you could come. So any questions, please find me. My name is Dana, or send me a message. I was the creator of the event. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Bye.
Hi, good morning. So today what we're going to do is finish up on the lecture on change, sum it up, the ABCs, the affect, the behavior, the cognition, and then move on to a related topic, which is setting goals, which will be the last topic that we'll address before we go on break. The last time I ended by talking about the acute change that comes with a eureka experience, with an aha, with an insight. And we talked about these 5 stages, and a couple of you contacted me after about this and said, well, it's not that smooth, and it's absolutely right. This is a theory. This is an outline. When you write, when you come up with ideas, when you generate a course, when you write a paper, or write a thesis, some of you are thesis writers, what you do is very often mix them. So you have preparation, and then you write a little bit, and then you take a break, and then you have an insight, and then you go back to more preparation, and on and on. This is just a general outline, which is useful in a few ways. First of all, it is useful in that we can understand by looking at it that there is no quick fix. None of the great creative artists, scientists, business people in history created in a vacuum. Initially, they became experts in their field. They worked hard. They immersed themselves in the material. So that's the first important element to remember. No shortcuts. We have to apply ourselves. Remember, the secret of success, it's not just think, imagine, believe. It also has to have the component of hard work as well as passion. So all the successful people, again, the best self-help books are biographies, good biographies that show you the process, not the 5 easy steps. The second important thing, beyond the importance of immersion, of the preparation, is the significance of taking time off. One of the first things that leaders of today, one of the things that they don't have today is time. It's the thing that they need most. Time off to incubate, to reflect, to metaphorically or literally sit in the bath and think. That's the incubation, the idle time stage. Remember J.P. Morgan's quote, I can do a year's work in 9 months, but not in 12. And that's when the eureka comes. That's when the good ideas come. It's actually after a good night's sleep. It's after we do nothing for a while. It's when we're in the shower. The next important component of this model is the evaluation part. There are many good ideas, but very few ideas come to fruition and actually become a good idea for a business, or a good idea for a scientific paper, or a book, or whatever it may be. That's when the evaluation comes, and that's when the elaboration comes. And these are no less important parts of the creative process. It really is about 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. No shortcuts. So to summarize the ABCs, the affect, the emotion, the behavior, action, and the cognition, the thought, I want to talk about a technique, a simple technique, journaling, that has remarkable consequences. Just so I get a show of hands, how many people keep a journal or have kept a journal for a significant amount of time? Okay, that's great. That's great to see. We know from this course and research that you've encountered before how difficult change is. Sometimes programs that have been around for 5 years don't help. Very often interventions were millions and billions. It's about $100 billion a year industry, the change industry in organizations. Most of the interventions don't work. We know how difficult it is to change. And yet journaling, very solid research showing how much it helps. So let me share with you a study. This was done by the person who really brought journaling into the scientific realm. So there have been people like Ira Progoff and others who have been talking about journaling for a very long time. But it was Jamie Pennybaker from the University of Texas, Austin, who brought this idea to the scientific realm and really researched it. And here is what he did. What he did was bring in participants and have them do the following. On 4 consecutive days that they came in, each day they would spend 15 minutes. That's all, 15 minutes times 4, writing about their most difficult experiences. Now they knew that no one would see it, or if they would see it, it would be without a name, completely confidential, so they were really able to treat it as their own journal. And here was the instructions that these participants got. It's a little long, but worth reading. Write continuously about the most upsetting or traumatic experience of your entire life. Don't worry about grammar, spelling, or sentence structure. In your writing, I want you to discuss your deepest thoughts and feelings about the experience. You can write about anything you want, but whatever you choose, it should be something that has affected you very deeply. Ideally, it should be about something you have not talked about with others in detail. It is critical, however, that you let yourself go and touch those deepest emotions and thoughts that you have. In other words, write about what happened and how you felt about it and how you feel about it now. Finally, you can write on different traumas during each session or the same one over the entire study. Your choice of trauma for each session is entirely up to you. Simple instructions, pretty straightforward. If you notice, you see the ABCs in it. So he says, write about what happened, which is the behavior essentially. Write about your deepest feelings, your affect, your emotions, and write about your thought. Analyze it. The ABCs in journaling. So when he did this study, initially, and the results came in, because one of the first things that he looked at was their anxiety levels. When the results came in, disappointment. In fact, thinking of stopping the study because this is what he found. So if we have this graph, this would be anxiety level. This would be time. He had a control group, and the control group just wrote about anything that they wanted to write about, showed no change over time. So they started here, and they essentially straight line. The intervention group, the experimental group, after 4 days of writing about their most traumatic, most difficult experiences, they started at the same point. They were randomly divided. And then a rise in their anxiety. After each of the days and during the 4 days, rise in their levels of anxiety. And at this point, he was thinking of terminating the study. Very disappointed, because he got it from personal experience. He knew that journaling helps him, and he knew other people who talk about it, who swear by journaling. But then, once the 4 days were over, during the 5th, especially starting 6th, 7th, and on days, this is what started to happen. Their anxiety levels went down. Not only did they reach the same level as before, they continued to go down. And the most important thing is that they stabilized below the previous level. They stabilized below the previous levels of anxiety. When he followed these participants over a longer period of time, up to a year. 4 times 15 minutes. That's a total of an hour. That's very little. And long-lasting results. Think about it. This is also what we saw before. Sometimes brief interventions are extremely effective. Think about the shyness study that I spoke about last week. After 12 sessions of 12 minutes with women who were interested in them, these shy heterosexual men changed radically. So change can come in a relatively brief period of time if we know how to intervene. And journaling is one of these interventions. Now, this is not going to be one of your response papers. It's too personal. I don't think it's appropriate to assign it. But I certainly do recommend that you do it. Follow specifically Penny Baker's instructions. Doesn't take that long. Do it on 4 days. 15 minutes, 20 minutes each time. And just write whatever comes to mind. So there was reduced anxiety over time. Other results of this study. And if you want to read much more about it, he has a wonderful book out called Opening Up. Opening Up by Jamie Pennybaker. They became healthier. So over the year of the study, they visited the doctor's office compared to a control group far less. In other words, it strengthened their immune system, not just their psychological immune system, their physiological immune system. Generally, they were in a better mood. They were happier, more jovial, more benefit finders after writing about their deepest traumas. They became more outgoing, less repressed, less suppressed. Now, why is that? We talked about it often, that positive emotions and painful emotions flow through the same pipeline. And if we suppress something, if we stop something which is painful, we're very often indirectly, inadvertently, also suppressing the positive emotions. Whereas here, when they open up, quite literally open up and allow these emotions to flow through them, they're essentially opening up a clogged channel through which emotions, painful as well as positive emotions, normally flow. And they experience higher levels of happiness. They're more open, more generous, as we saw also when we do the gratitude exercise. Very similar results. There were gender differences, which is interesting. Now, both sexes benefited from it. However, men benefited more than women. Think about it. Why do you think that is? And it makes sense if you think about it. Women benefited significantly, got better. But men benefited even more. Why? Because women have, generally speaking, again, this is broad brushstroke stereotype, but generally speaking, women open up more. They speak more with their girlfriends, they have closer friends, and they talk about issues. Men, still in our culture today, are much more closed because it's not cool to open up. It's not cool to give yourself the permission to be human, especially when others are listening. So women generally in their lives have more of these support systems than men. But still, even women who have strong support systems still benefit from this exercise. Which reminds me of another result of a study I mentioned a month ago at the beginning of the course, which is that women generally, again, these are all averages, but in general, women, or rather men, benefit more from marriage than women, for a similar reason. Because women already have the support system in place. Men, very often, for the first time, they're with someone whom they feel comfortable enough opening up to. And both male and females benefit from a long-term relationship, but men generally tend to benefit more than women. For the same reason that he found gender differences here. Cross cultures, this was done in China, in Japan, Mexico, Argentina. United States, of course, Europe, replicated across cultures. In all cultures, people benefit from this study. Here's another study which took the exact opposite approach. So Laura King was a student of Penny Baker, took the exact opposite approach and said, let's study positive experience. What happens when the individuals write about their most intense positive experience? And what she did specifically was take the instructions from Abraham Maslow's work on peak experience. And here are the instructions. Once again, this was 3 times 15 minutes, so 45 minutes total on 3 consecutive days. Think of the most wonderful experience or experiences in your life. Happiest moments, ecstatic moments, moments of rapture, perhaps from being in love or from listening to music or suddenly being hit by a book or painting or from some great creative moment. Choose one such experience or moment. Try to imagine yourself at that moment, including all the feelings and emotions associated with the experience. Now, write about the experience in as much detail as possible, trying to include the feelings, thoughts, and emotions that were present at the time. Please try your best to re-experience the emotions involved. Essentially the exact opposite of Penny Baker. Results? Identical. Those who wrote about their peak experiences, their best experiences, visited the doctor's office less times. In other words, it strengthened their physiological immune system and experienced more happiness, so both psychological and physiological results. Now, when you look at this, some of you may be thinking back, well, what about the Lyubomirsky study? Remember the Lyubomirsky study that said when you write about positive emotions, actually you feel worse. Whereas when you write about negative emotions, you do feel better, as Penny Baker suggested. Here is the difference. The instructions that Laura King gave were mostly about describing and re-experiencing, replaying your experience. It wasn't about analyzing why did it happen, how did it was rather how it happened. In other words, replaying it. When the instructions, and this is the Lyubomirsky study, were analyze the experience, why it happened, how did you get there, and so on, that's when it had the negative consequences over time. But just replaying the experience, just writing about how wonderful it is, re-experiencing emotionally what that was, that actually led to benefits. Now, the interesting question is why? Why are there such remarkable benefits to journaling? Let's understand the process, the mechanism. So there are a few things that are at play here. One of the things, for example, with positive emotions is that when you're replaying it, you're simply you're fortifying the neural pathways. You replay it, you imagine it again, and you make it more likely to happen again. Just like when you have a river, remember the analogy from 2 weeks ago, you have a river, and the more water goes through it, then the wider it becomes, and then the more water is likely to go into it. That's the self-reinforcing nature of change. So the first reason why writing, especially about painful emotions, but not just painful emotions, the reason why it helps is because of tension. We talked about ironic processing, Daniel Wagner's work from here, and what he talks about is that when we suppress a natural phenomenon, it often intensifies, be it thinking about a pink elephant, or be it suppressing painful emotions. And when we give ourselves the permission to be human, we're much more likely to release it, to let go, which is why therapy helps, which is why sharing with friends, opening up helps, which is why journaling helps. This is the whole idea of suppression or repression. The second thing that Penny Baker talks about is coherence. One of the things that he finds is that the individuals who benefit most, and he analyzes the text, confidentially of course, but he analyzes the text, the individuals who benefit most from this study are ones who introduced a lot of insight words or insight phrases, meaning By the third day, they're already writing, now I see that, or I understand that, or it just dawned on me that, or I realize that. Those who have many of these words or phrases in their writings are the ones who benefited most. In other words, they've created a sense of coherence out of the experience. They made sense out of something that perhaps before that was senseless. Or in other words, they created a story around their experiences. It's no longer disparate, disjointed, disconnected data. Now it is a coherent whole. It's a story. Now I can deal with it. And if you think about it, what do people mostly remember? People mostly remember stories. Why? Because you remember a story because it's one unit. It's a whole. If I'd given you now a collection of, 100 random words, it would take you a very long time to commit it to memory. I mean, we all know, we all took the SATs. But if I tell you a story, you're much more likely to remember it. Maybe not word for word, but certainly the general ideas, because we can hold it, we can grasp it, because it has a sense of coherence. I can deal with it, I can handle it, as opposed to some disparate ideas, disjointed words. The exact same here. We want to feel that our lives have a sense of coherence, that we can make sense of them. Pennebaker. An artifact of our ambiguous and unpredictable world is the anxiety of not attaining completion and not understanding a simple cause and effect explanation for traumatic disturbances. Alas, we naturally search for meaning and the completion of events. It gives us a sense of control and predictability over our lives. Again, that's why therapy helps, because we create coherence out of experiences. This is why there was far less post-traumatic stress disorder after the Holocaust than there was after the Vietnam War. Because after the Holocaust, they spoke about these experiences. They created a story around it. A tragic one, but still there was a sense of coherence. As opposed to Vietnam, when it was just random flashes of experiences without giving themselves the permission, or without society in many ways giving them the permission to open up and to create a story out of it that they could handle, they could grasp. The work of Pennebaker, to a great extent, relies on the work of a psychologist whom we've mentioned on the very first day of class, and that is Aaron Antonovsky. Aaron Antonovsky, whom I consider to be one of the fathers of positive psychology, if you remember, came up with the notion of salutogenesis, an alternative to the pathogenic model. Pathogenic model, the model that focuses on pathology, on sickness, on illness, whereas what Antonovsky said is we need to focus on the origins of health. Saluto, health, genesis, origin. And what he did specifically was the following. So he was a sociologist, and he said the following. He said, look, life is tough. People go through hardship. They go through difficulties. Whether we like it or not, we all in life encountered hardships. In a relationship, in school, at work, wherever, whichever domain, there are hardships, there are difficulties. Life is hard, period. We know that. However, there are some people who are able to better deal with the hardship, with the difficulties, who still, despite, they don't do away with these hardships, despite these hardships and difficulties, are still able to lead a full, fulfilling, and overall happy life. Not the constant high that's reserved for psychopaths and dead people, with the same ups and downs, but at a higher level of well-being, or at a lower level of anxiety. And he said we need to study those. We shouldn't just study the sick people. Whether the sick people who are physically ill, which is mostly the pathogenic model of medicine, or the people who are unwell psychologically, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, as psychology has mostly studied. He said we need to look at the healthy people and study them, which is exactly the model that led to asking the question in the 1980s with at-risk population, what makes some individuals succeed despite unfavorable circumstances? It was his question that made all the difference. So he did the same in his research and asked about the general population. Who are the people who are healthy, and what is the origin of that health? What distinguishes them from other people? And he came up with the notion of the sense of coherence. The people have a sense of coherence about their lives. What that means, he said that it has three components that he researched and identified. The first component, a sense of comprehensibility. I understand the world. It makes sense to me. I see, I realize, I get it. The world, an event, difficulties and hardships, highs and lows, make sense to me mostly. Second, sense of manageability. I can deal with it. I can handle it. I have the internal as well as external resources to deal with it, as opposed to being helpless. This is a sense of efficacy, of confidence in being able to deal with the hardships that arise. So that's the second component. The third and final component that makes up a sense of coherence, according to Antonovsky, is a sense of meaningfulness. This was not in vain, this difficulty. This disagreement with my partner was not for nothing, because we understand one another better now, and we're even closer, more intimate. This failure was not in vain. I have learned from it, and I have grown from it. This mistake has a reason, and again, not necessarily happened for the best, but learning how to make the best of what happens. These three components are what he identified, and it was replicated in later research as the source of mental health. To quote Pennebaker, to quote Antonovsky, a sense of coherence, a global orientation that expresses the extent to which one has a pervasive, enduring, though dynamic feeling of confidence that, 1, the stimuli deriving from one's internal and external environments in the course of living are structured, predictable, and explicable. Comprehensible, in other words. 2, the resources are available to one to meet the demands posed by these stimuli. Internal resources and external resources. I can deal with it, I can manage. And 3, these demands are challenges worthy of investment and engagement. It's meaningful. Look at these three, and for all those who write a journal, I bet you can identify these three in your writings. This is what a journal does to a great extent. When we write, and when we really write about our experiences, our difficult experiences, this is very often what comes out, a sense of coherence. I see, I understand, makes sense. I can deal with it, I can handle it. I've just found a path of how to do it. Even if dealing with it and handling it is writing a journal. And finally, it makes sense to me, it's meaningful to me now, whereas before it didn't as much. So if you don't have a journal and you don't journal, it is certainly something that I highly, highly recommend. Let me summarize the whole change lecture. The A, B, and the C. The three are interconnected. In fact, if we want real change to come about, they have to be interconnected. Why? Because habit is like a flood. And it's not enough if we just create a small nook or a cranny trying to create a new habit, because the flood will wash it away. What we need is the A, the B, and the C. Implement these changes in our lives. And they are interconnected. So let me give you an example. Let's say someone who has low self-esteem. Low self-esteem, the C, cognition, they don't think highly of themselves. Poor self-evaluation. When you don't think highly of yourself, you're much more likely to be enervated, to feel down, not to be motivated. And as a result of that, that is the affect, the emotion that you experience, not good feelings. As a result of that, we're much more likely to do nothing. In other words, the B is do nothing. Now, through self-perception theory, the behavior then affects my cognition. I'm doing nothing, I'm not dealing, I'm not coping, I'm avoiding. And that lowers my self-esteem even more, my evaluation of myself, the C, and that leads to even worse emotions, and so on and so on and so on in a downward spiral until, in some cases, we reach resignation, or in Marty Seligman's words, learned helplessness. Now think of someone who has high self-esteem, high levels of self-confidence. I believe in myself, I think I can do well. That leads to high levels of motivation. Remember what Marva Collins does, the model that we talked about under beliefs as self-fulfilling prophecies. That leads to high levels of motivation, strong emotions, I'm energized, and that in turn leads to more action. The B, the behaviors. Because I act more, I do more, I cope more, I put myself on the line more, I'm much more likely to have a more positive evaluation of myself, which leads to more positive emotions and on and on and on in an upward spiral. The spiral that Barbara Fredrickson talks about in the Broaden and Build, the spiral that Bandura talks about when he discusses self-efficacy. When we intervene, it's important to introduce, if possible, all three, and we can start anywhere. So let's take an example of someone with social phobia, someone who is afraid to be out there in front of people. One way to deal with it, let's begin with the A, the affect, the emotion. One way to deal with it is through medication that goes directly to our emotions. Another way of dealing with it is meditation, which also affects our emotions directly. Some people benefit more from one or from the other. Depends also how extreme the situation is. But that's the A, the affect. One way of dealing with the behavior is through what's called in cognitive behavioral therapy exposure, which is gradual exposure to the stimuli that create that phobia. So initially, I'll walk 10 yards out of my home. Initially, exposure through the imagination, and I include it under behavior because the mind doesn't know the difference between the imaginary and the real. So gradually being exposed to the stimuli, and over time being exposed more and more until I can go out to a mall and not experience the same anxiety that I did a year ago. So that's through behavior. Very effective, the exposure technique. And finally, you can also intervene through cognition. In therapy, in dealing with irrational thoughts, psychological traps, the 3 M's. Am I magnifying the extent? Am I minimizing something? For example, my successes in working with people, or am I making up imaginary scenarios? Am I catastrophizing events when I can have a more realistic view? So that's by thinking about it, the cognition. Let me share with you a personal example of something that I dealt with. So as you know, born through genes, high levels of anxiety, very prone to it, startled very easily, still to less today, but still to some extent today. Used to get very nervous in squash matches, used to choke often when I was playing important games. And that's something that speaking in front of an audience, got very nervous and anxious, and this is something that I decided that I really wanted to deal with, more than any other thing that I was facing, this anxiety. So what did I do? Let me begin first with the C, cognition. So what I did, I analyzed the situation in my journal. I used the Bureau of Study Council. I learned and studied about the 3 M's, the irrational thoughts, magnifying, minimizing, making up, catastrophizing. And through cognition, it helped a lot, but that wasn't enough. After the C, I went to the A, the affect. And the affect was, for me, physical exercise. Even today, this morning at home, I ran. I exercise because significantly lowers anyone's levels of anxiety. And I can tell a significant difference in my talks if I don't exercise. So even, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, David, my son, was unwell, and I had to take him to the doctor first thing Tuesday morning. Didn't have time to exercise. I actually felt it in lecture. I was more nervous, more anxious. Makes a big difference. As we'll talk about after break, it's literally has the same effect as taking an anti-anxiety pill. So exercise was certainly there, worked directly on my emotion. Yoga helped me tremendously in dealing with anxiety and lowering that level. So this was the emotional. The other thing, music. Relaxing music. You know my taste in music. I don't need to repeat it again. So actually when Tommy and I got married and we moved in together, she couldn't believe my collection of CDs. She said, "You don't look that anxious," because I had the most relaxing classical music in the world, music for relaxation, music for dealing with anxiety, silent, quiet music. I mean, a whole shelf of these but they relax me, they really help me. And finally, behavior. Introducing behavior. So it was through exposure, initially giving a talk, because I wanted to be a teacher, giving a talk to my squash team, giving a talk to my family, places that were safe for me, giving a talk to anyone who would listen, initially small groups, and gradually building it up. Exposure through the imagination. Once again, the imaginary thing. And over time becoming more confident. Another thing that for me was very significant as an undergrad here, speaking up in section. I was terrified of speaking up. And when I decided to do that, I had no doubt in my mind that everyone in section could hear my heartbeat, because it was in my head. And yet, gradually, I spoke up a little bit more and a little bit more, and then through self-perception theory, it actually got better and better and better. And I still do all these things. I still do yoga. I still exercise regularly. I still engage in the CBT approach, the 3 M's. I keep a journal, which combines very often all 3. And I listen to relaxing music. And it works. It works. Now, change is not easy. It is hard. It takes time. However, that doesn't mean that the process itself cannot be enjoyable. It's not, okay, when I've changed, then I'll be happy. The process itself is potentially extremely rewarding. Sometimes difficult. Potentially very rewarding. The journey as well as the destination. The other important thing to remember about change, this is taken from the work of really the person who took psychoanalysis and transformed it into a more positive approach, Karen Horney, whom I've mentioned before. What she says about neuroses is that neuroses never go away completely. And when she says neurosis, she means it in the broadest sense. So for example, if I'm a perfectionist, I'll always have some perfectionism in me, and we'll talk about it after the break. If I'm prone to anxiety, I'll never be the Dalai Lama, unlikely. Though it will always be there, and it will always be potentially triggered by an event. And she says that's okay, that's natural, that's human. And we need to accept it, because if we don't accept it, then we'll be constantly frustrated, because we'd want to change completely, or expect our partner to change completely. Very difficult, unrealistic. It takes time, it's gradual. And we need to also learn, and we can learn to enjoy the process. Henry David Thoreau, 1840s. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. And again, it's the process, it's not the outcome that matters more. The outcome will lead to a spike, but very quickly we'll go back to our base level. It's the process of actually doing those activities, the A's, the B's, and the C's. that will lead to a happier, not perfect, not happiest, but happier life. Over time, it takes time to carve out like a statue, chipping away the excess stone, the limitations, and building a beautiful life. It is not only the highest of art, it is also, I would argue, a high science, and that is the science of psychology. I want to move on now. Move on and talk about oops. One second. Here we go. I want to talk about a topic that is related, very much related to the whole change. To the whole change process, and that is goal setting. Now, question for you. How many people here, put your hand up if this applies to you, do you want to become more efficient and procrastinate less? If it's true for you, put your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Put your hand up now if you want to experience less stress and be calmer, whether it's during exam period or no. Okay, 1, 2. Okay. Now, if you put your hand up for one of these questions, you should stay. If you put up your hand for both questions, you should not only stay, you should stay awake. Because what we're going to talk about over the next 2 classes is the importance of goals and how they can help us deal with stress, how they can help us deal with procrastination, how we can become more efficient. Not perfectly so. By the end of the 2 weeks, you're not going to be a well-oiled machine. You're just going to be a happier human being, which I think is a lot. So first of all, the topics that we'll talk about under goal setting. First, understand the theory and the practice of goal setting, the ivory tower and the main street of it. Second, how do we deal with stress? We'll talk about this in the next class. And finally, I don't think we'll have time for this, but I'm still leaving up the PowerPoints there just so you can look at it, and I elaborate on it in the book. Moving from material perception to happiness perception, which is essentially but what I talk about in the last meditation of the book, the happiness revolution, an internal revolution that can take place. I don't think we'll have time for it before break, but you'll still have the material on it. So let's begin with theory and practice. What I want to do now is convince you very simply to set goals. Convince you that it's important, and yeah, you're going to do it for your response papers, and you have started already doing it, but I really want you to convince you as a way of life, of setting goals regularly, whether in a business, whether in your personal life. First, I'm going to do it by showing you the research on setting goals and performance, and second, setting goals and happiness, how it can contribute to our success in the conventional currency, as well as in the ultimate currency. Quite simply, people who set goals are generally controlling for other things more successful. Why? One of the main reasons is because what goals do is they focus us. Very often we're all over the place, we're not sure where we're going, and if we don't know where we're going, we're unlikely to get there. And the focus gets us directed, it brings forth resources, external and internal resources that are necessary to get there. Abraham Maslow, being focused on a task produces organization for efficiency both within the organism and in the environment. Quite remarkable how goals actually work. When we set goals, when we enter something, whether it's privately, but even better publicly, things begin to happen inside us as well as around us. Also, goals contribute to performance and well-being because they strengthen our resilience. Remember the second class when we talked about resilience, one of the things that distinguished those kids who were successful despite difficult external circumstances was the fact that they were resilient, and one of the distinguishing characteristics was that they set goals for themselves. They were future-oriented. Not only thinking about the past, being learning to be helpless, but focusing on the future. Nietzsche once wrote that if we have a what for, every how becomes possible. When we have a what for, every how becomes possible. And we're much more likely to overcome difficulties and hardships. If we have a goal, a mission, something that we care about, something that we want to attain. Goals make us more successful for the exact same reason that positive beliefs do. What we're doing with goals, we're declaring that we believe that we're going to get something. Roger Bannister said that he will break the 4-minute barrier. Thomas Edison said that by the 31st of December 1879, he will generate light from electricity. Setting goals makes it more likely to come true because our mind does not like when there is an inconsistency between what is inside and what is outside. It wants there to be a match. And if I believe in a goal and I declare a goal, the outside is likely to match that. Again, not 100% correlation as we've discussed, but certainly making it much more likely to happen, making us much more likely to be successful. And what is the knapsack? Imagine the following. You go on a road trip and you have a knapsack on your back and you reach a wall, a barrier. What do you do? Well, there are many things you can do when you reach that wall, and that wall is long and high. One way is to say, okay, pity, and turn around. In other words, avoid that wall. Another thing we can do is take out our sledgehammer and try and break it down. Another thing that we can do, before we do any of the other things, is take our knapsack and throw it over the wall. Take our knapsack and simply throw it over the wall. Why? Because necessity is the mother of inventions. I need my knapsack to continue. I need my knapsack. I want it. And now that it's over the wall, I have no choice but to get over that wall. Whether it's by breaking it down, whether it's by finding a way around it, under it, or over it. But suddenly, I will come up with solutions that I have not seen before. And this is how it works. It's remarkable how it works for the exact same reason that when you declare a goal, such as, I want to buy a computer, suddenly you see computer ads all around you, whereas before you didn't see computer ads. Or let's say, you want to buy a specific car. Suddenly you see that specific car all around you where you didn't see it before. Why? Because we co-create our reality. Through our questions to a great extent. Remember, the children on the bus were there all along, but you didn't see them. Until I presented a goal to you, which was to count the number of children on the bus. And then suddenly, it was so clear that it was right in front of your eyes. Before it, they didn't exist for you. That's what a goal does. If I declare that I have to get over the wall, and my question is, how do I get over this wall? It's not thinking about, is it possible or is it not possible? It's rather, how can I get over this wall? This question opens up opportunities, many of which I have not seen before. Suddenly the children on the bus are right in front of me. Suddenly a hole in the wall is right in front of me. Suddenly I see a sledgehammer that I didn't see before right next to me. Necessity is the mother of inventions. If we ask the right questions, it opens up opportunities. The other thing that's at work here is the power of the word. Words create worlds. Let there be light. We see it in religion, and there was light. Words create the world. Book of John, in the beginning was the Word. But it's not just in religion. Look at this great country. The United States was declared into existence. Words have power. They have meaning, especially when the words are meaningful to us. When the goals that we declare are meaningful to us, they're much more likely to come true. The connection between concepts and conceive is not just etymological. It is also metaphysical. It is also real. Because when we declare something, when we say something, it is much more likely to become a reality. What words do is essentially create an image in our mind, especially if we imagine the goal. It creates an image in our mind, and the mind doesn't know the difference between the imaginary and the real, and the mind wants consistency. That is what goals do. They help us create consistency. I want to read you an excerpt that I talk about many of these things in the book. For some of you, this may be a repetition. But I want to read you an excerpt from W.H. Murray, who led the Scottish expedition to the Himalayas, one of the most prominent, accomplished climbers of all time, climbed the Everest. Here is what he says in his writing about the expeditions that he took. Concerning all acts of creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would not have otherwise occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no man would have dreamed would come his way. I've learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. Why it works, how it works, we're not really sure, but it works. Just like when you declare that you're looking for a computer, suddenly you see all these opportunities. The same with commitments. When we commit, things begin to happen. We begin to identify external resources as well as internal resources, things that we didn't see before. Because my question becomes, how can I succeed? And then children on the bus or the time on the clock suddenly become visible to us. And we're able to succeed, much more likely to succeed than before. Words create worlds. So this is about success. Very well documented. Some of your readings relate to this. People who set goals generally controlling for other factors are more successful, whether it's in business, whether it's in their personal lives. Goals matter. They don't just matter, though, for the quote-unquote hard currency. They also matter for the ultimate currency, the currency of happiness. Goals properly understood lead to happiness. And I emphasize properly understood. Why? Because we know that attaining goals, the attainment of a goal does not in and of itself lead to happiness. Yes, getting tenure will lead to a spike in my well-being, but very quickly I'll go back to my base level. Winning a lottery or making a lot of money or getting or getting promoted at work will lead to a spike in my well-being, but it will not lead to long-lasting happiness. So that's temporary, we know that. So we know that the attainment of goals does not lead to happiness. What does lead to happiness? Understanding the proper role of goals, and understanding that it's not the attaining of a goal that leads to happiness, but the having of a goal that leads to happiness. So 2 years ago, when I taught positive psychology, a book came out by a very important scholar in the area of happiness, who is the Dalai Lama's right-hand man. He's his translator, Ricardo Mathieu. Wonderful book on happiness came out. And we, in William James Hall 1, engaged in a debate. It was an event for Harvard students and faculty, and we engaged in a debate, happiness east and west. And we agreed on many things. As you know, I meditate regularly and certainly believe in the power of a lot of the Buddhist psychology. However, the one thing we disagreed on was goals. That's the one thing we disagree on, because in Buddhism, at least according to many of the interpretations, not all, but many of the interpretations, the state we want to reach is a state of non-attachment. A state where we will not have something external that we want, that we desire, that we will be completely present in the here and now. Now, I think it's a wonderful ideal, perhaps, but what I argued, and what I still argue, is that it's unrealistic. As human beings, I do not believe, maybe after 30 years of meditating for 8 hours a day it's possible, but I do not believe that we can reach a state where we're not attached. And setting goals is an example of attachment, because when I say I want to win this championship, or I want to get an A- in this course, or I want to get a job in this bank, this is a goal, which means by definition that I'm attached to the outcome. If I wasn't attached, if I didn't care, then it wouldn't matter. And I think that's not only important for success, it is also important for happiness. So that's where I differ to a great extent from some of the Buddhist interpretations of non-attachment, of being in a desire-less state. However, where we are similar in our understanding is the focus on the present. Goals properly understood, their role is to liberate us to enjoy the present. What does this mean? Let's say you go off on a road trip and you have no idea where you're going. You don't have a goal, you don't have a destination in mind. You're less likely, rather than more likely, less likely to enjoy the journey, because every minute you'll look left or right or ahead to see if you're not falling over the stage. Whereas if you know where you're going, you have a sense of direction. You are liberated. You're much more likely to enjoy the process, the flowers on the side as well. Think about your lives, periods when you had no idea, or, for many of you, I know it's happening right now. You have no idea where you're going next year. Now, for a while, for most people, it's okay, it's fun. But after a while, you want to know where you're going, because when you're immersed in something and you have a clear sense of direction, you're much more likely to be happy. Which explains why so many people, when they retire, become less happy. Even though they've been dreaming of being retired for many years, when they actually retire, they become less happy. The ones who are happier when they retire are the ones who actually set goals for themselves. Whether it's taking a class, whether it's learning something new, whether it's spending more time with family and friends, but they have a goal, as opposed to, let's just enjoy ourselves, let's just be. We need that goal, this outcome, this future orientation, so that we can enjoy the present more. The goals liberate us to enjoy the here and now. In other words, if you think about it, the role of goals is actually means. They're means toward an end, and the end are the present experiences. Again, the goals in themselves, as we said, as we've discussed, will not make us happier, whether the attainment of the goal or failing to attain the goal will be on the ups and downs, the vicissitudes. But if we want the base level is the here and now, the present. It's the process, it's the journey that we're living mostly, not the outcome. The way I start the book, I talk about thinking that the Israeli championship would make me happy. And it did for 4 hours. And then back again to base level. Professors who get tenure think that that is what will make them happy for the rest of their lives, the attainment of that goal. It doesn't. They go back to base level of happiness, whether they get it or they don't get it. The key is to learn to enjoy the process, and one of the roles of goals is to liberate us so that we can enjoy the process. Goals are means toward the present end, which is taking a lot of goal theory and turning it around. This explains why so many high achievers are unhappy. This explains why so many high achievers turn to drugs and to alcohol. And by the way, today even more so than in the past, or maybe today we know about it more than in the past. Going to rehab centers constantly, coming out and going back, and we ask ourselves, why? How could it be that those people who seemingly have it all, fame, fortune, beauty, anyone they want, the life that most people in the world dream about, how come they end up in a rehab center? How come they're unhappy? Here is the how come. You see, for years, when they climb up the ranks, when they have the dream of becoming a famous person, a person who is admired, revered, a person who can get anything or anyone almost they want, when they dream about it, they may be unhappy, but they're saying to themselves, okay, I'm unhappy now, but I'll be happy when I get there. And then they get there, and they realize that there is no there there. They think it will make them happy, but it doesn't. And that's when the real problems begin. Because that's when they begin to experience helplessness. That's when they become resigned. That's when they go into, on the hamburger model, that's when they go into the learned helplessness and the resignation and the nihilism. Because everyone has told them that once they make it, then they'll be happy. They've told themselves, once I make it, then I'll be happy. And they're not any happier for it. Yeah, initially when the fame begins, and when they start having things their way as they'd always dreamed, of course they're happier. But then they go back to their base level. And when they go to their base level, they're surprised, they're upset, they're disappointed, and more than anything, they're scared. Because what now? Until that point, they were sustained by the hope that when they get there, they'll be happy. But they're not happier, and they're scared, and they're lost. And they look for solutions very often outside of the normal experiences, outside of ordinary life. And where is that? That very often is with drugs and with alcohol, because that takes us out of our normal day-to-day ordinary lives, for good and ill. This misunderstanding, prevalent, and yet most people live that way. And they think, and this is why so many people go through a midlife crisis, for example. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. Because there are many people who are pretty accomplished, who have made it, and then they say, what now? Is this all there is to it? Yes, this is all there is to it. And the challenge is to identify the treasures of happiness that are embedded, that are there in the it, and they're all around us. Again, happiness is not contingent on our status or the state of our bank account. It's contingent on our state of mind, of how we interpret our reality, of on what we choose to focus on. And to be happier, it's the present that matters much more. Quote from my book, "Happiness is not about making it to the peak of the mountain, nor is it about climbing aimlessly around the mountain. Happiness is the experience of climbing toward the peak. It is about having a goal. It is about having a destination in mind and then letting go and enjoying the process." You know, there are many people who talk to me about it, and again, I went through the exact same experience and saying, okay, so what is going to be the next job that I take, or what is going to be the path that I take? And once they take a path, there is very often regret. I should have taken the other path. I should have taken this job. I should have gone there. And my response to it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, in the ultimate currency, it doesn't matter. Because, yeah, let's say I'm at a job that I should have taken and I would have been very successful there. Fine, I would have enjoyed a high when I became very successful, but that in and of itself would not make me happy. The key is to have the goal. The key is to have the commitment to whatever it is that I'm doing. Now, that commitment may change every 3 days, and that's okay. It's the having of the goals, having of that commitment that matters. So if you chose a certain path and now you regret it, remember, it really doesn't matter. You can be as happy on both paths as long as you're committed. Because when we're committed, that's when we can enjoy the journey. Doesn't matter as much what it is that we're committed to, provided, of course, that it's moral and it's not about hurting others, which ultimately doesn't just hurt others, it also hurts ourselves. David Watson, in the Handbook of Positive Psychology: "Contemporary research emphasizes that it is the process of striving after goals rather than goal attainment per se that is crucial for happiness and positive affectivity." And finally, two of the leading researchers in the field, David Myers and Ed Diner: "Happiness grows less from the passive experience of desirable circumstances than from involvement in valued activities and progress toward one goal." Here is a beautiful poem that I think captures, by Gwendolyn Brooks. "Live not for battles won, live not for the end of the song, live for the along." It's not any goals that matter. It's not any goals that are, not all goals are created equal. And here is when we do get to a place where it's important to think about your goals. Yes, the commitment is the most important, but there are certain goals that are better than others. Self-concordant goals, very briefly, because it's in your readings, are essentially goals that are aligned with your personal interests and values, things that you care about, doing things that are important to you. So, for example, doing pre-med because what you really, really want to be is a doctor and treat people. Studying economics because the market fascinates you and you want to engage in work that relates to it. You're passionate about it. Joining a student organization because you believe in their mission, aligned with your personal interests, with your values, with your passion. These are goals that you choose freely, not goals that are imposed from the outside, whether it's by someone specific or specific people or by abstract society, and doing it out of a sense of obligation or duty. It's to do things that you care about deeply from within. In other words, these are things that you want to do, or that you feel, that you perceive as things that you want to do, rather than things that you have to do. My teacher, Ohad Kamin, when I graduated from college, and I was debating, I didn't know which direction to go, said to me the following. He said, here is the advice from a 50-year-old. He was 50 at the time. He said, identify the things that you can do And then, out of those, identify the things that you want to do. And list them down. Make a list, long or short, whatever it is. Now, out of the things that you want to do, identify those things that you really want to do. And then look at them. And out of those things, identify those that you really, really want to do, and then do them. One of the best advice that I got, very simple, but so important. And again, it's to take time aside and to think about those things. So what are my self-concordant goals? What is of interest to me? What is valuable to me? What am I passionate about? What do I want to, rather than feel that I have to do? And sometimes the answers are not easy answers. Sometimes the answers are not answers that I want to hear. And the implications, the ramifications of following that path may not be as pleasant initially, because it may mean going against the grain. It may mean doing something that yields difficulties from other people or from the environment. It may not be the most popular choice. Now, one of the things that I talk about in the book, and I think is such an important component of happiness, is spirituality. Now, the dictionary definition of spirituality is, one of the definitions is the real sense of significance of something. So if I see something as significant, as important, as meaningful, I'm having a spiritual experience engaging in it. So what is significant to me? What is important to me? And the thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter what I choose, what direction I go in. If I choose something that is self-concordant, that is aligned with my personal goals and mission, I will lead a spiritual life. In fact, an investment banker who goes into investment banking for the right reasons, because he or she cares about this work, because they think it's important, because they enjoy it, because they love dealing with numbers and having the adrenaline rush. And yes, there are people who truly enjoy it. If they're going in it for the right reasons, they will lead a much more spiritual life than a monk who goes into the order for the wrong reasons. And of course, vice versa. Whatever we choose, the self-concordant goals, and I truly believe that the world will become a better place, not just individual lives will become a better place, if people pursue their passions, their self-concordant goals. Easier said than done. Becoming self-concordant is a difficult skill, requiring both accurate self-perceptual abilities and the ability to resist social pressures that may sometimes push one in inappropriate directions. But we need to engage in these activities. Why? Because life is short. Life is short. Life is too short to do what I have to do. It's barely long enough to do what I want to do. And the sooner we start on that want to, the better. This does not mean that you can't now say to yourself something like, well, my real passion is starting my own business, and in order to get the foundation, I will work as a consultant or investment banker for 2 years. Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly fine, even though it's not your passion working 80 hours a week in front of an Excel sheet. That's okay. Sometimes we need to delay gratification. The danger is that we enter this delayed gratification state for our entire lives. And that becomes the rat race path. And that is what we need to be wary of. This is what we need to keep in the back of our mind. I want to show you a quick video excerpt from one of my favorite movies, Dead Poets Society, where Robin Williams talks about the importance of identifying what it is that we were meant to do with our lives. In other words, our self-concordant goals.
Spitz, you open your hymn notes, page 542. Read the first stanza of the poem you find there.
The Virgins to make much of time?
Yes.
One.
Somewhat appropriate, isn't it?
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Now, who knows what that means?
Carpe diem. That's to seize the day.
Very good, Mr.
Meeks.
Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thanks for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. I'd like you to step forward over here and peruse some of the faces from the past. You've walked past them many times. I don't think you've really looked at them. They're not that different from you, are they? Same haircuts, full of hormones, just like you. Invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait until it was too late to make from their lives even one iota of what they were capable? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils. If you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in. Listen. You hear it?
That was weird.
But different. Spooky, if you ask me. He'll test us on that stuff?
Oh, come on, Cameron. Don't you get anything?
So, carpe diem, do what you want. Yeah.